Ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply touched by the warmth of your welcome. Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, "Home is the place our feet may leave, but not our hearts." This Assembly chamber and the Senate chamber have been home to me for 35 years. I sat here as a freshman legislator listening to Governor Herbert Lehman deliver his annual message. He was a governor in the tradition of New York governors, men of courage and vision. The unforgettable Alfred E. Smith, who struck his first heroic, hammer-like blows for humanity in this very chamber. Franklin Roosevelt, Thomas Dewey, Averell Harriman, and my predecessor, the incomparable Nelson Rockefeller. Based on my experience, I am convinced that while the executive and legislature are independent and co-equal branches of government, the interests of the people are best served when these two branches work in cooperation. This administration will seek to progress in partnership with you, all of you. As we meet an energy crisis hammers at every economic, social, and personal facet of our lives, while inflation continues to plague millions of families straining to live on modest incomes. In such a time, the people want no extravagant ventures adding to the crushing tax burden they already bear. They want leadership that wisely balances what we want to do and what we must do with what the people can afford to do. The hallmark of this administration will be compassion for people within a framework of governmental economy and efficiency and deep sensitivity to the burden of taxes imposed on our citizens by every level of government. This administration will pursue the moderate middle way, where most Americans place their convictions and their confidence. Today I will present in general terms, with fuller details in the printed message, the administration program for meeting the issues which we face. While the national energy crisis demands a long-term national solution, there are steps which a state can take. First of all, I propose to crack down on all of those who profiteer and gouge and cheat the public in the distribution, wholesaling, and retail sale of gasoline and other fuels. I will also create an Office of Fuel and Energy, ask for special powers to meet energy emergencies, require that any new state cars be smaller models providing better fuel efficiency and economy, and promote state research into new fuel sources. The energy crisis dramatically underscores the absolute necessity of preserving public transportation. A proposal has been worked out among state and New York City officials to hold the subway and bus fares at 35 cents. As a first step, I am submitting a special message to you today calling for a $100 million repayable advance of state funds to New York City for the Transit Authority. Your approval will enable subway and bus fares in New York City to be held at 35 cents through May 1st. To hold the line on public transportation fares in New York City and elsewhere throughout the state beyond May 1st, I will submit a proposal composed of three equally essential parts: $100 million in state funds, $100 million in local funds, and $200 million in federal funds which can be used for public transportation operating costs. If you approve, and local and federal governments do their share, this plan can hold the line on fares statewide for another year. My friends, energy and public transportation are material challenges. This nation also faces a moral crisis. The edges of ethics have become blurred. A stain of cynicism is spreading throughout the fabric of American democracy, not only marring its appearance before the world, but like acid, eating into the very fibers that give it strength. We must reverse this corrosion of confidence and restore the people's belief in the integrity of government. After I have received and considered the report of your Select Committee on the Election Law and its Citizens Advisory Committee, I will recommend reforms in campaign spending and reporting requirements. The plain fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that we presently have a state election law that hugely magnifies the risks of electoral abuse and questionable financing, in large part because the law stretches political campaigns to absurd lengths. Unless this law is changed, party nominating conventions this year will have to take place in mid-March, well before the legislature will have adjourned, making everything we do thereafter suspect of partisan political motivation. Primaries are set for June. Elections take place in November. This means a campaign lasting 8 months in 1974. Lengthy campaigns inevitably drive up campaign costs and encourage questionable methods and sources of financing. And quite frankly, in these days of instant communication, long, dragged-out campaigns only bore the voters. I will therefore recommend limiting political campaigns to reasonable lengths by rescheduling convention and primary dates beginning this year. In these days of soaring prices, we must do everything possible to give consumers greater protection. I am submitting legislation requiring unit pricing on grocery items so that consumers can make intelligent price comparisons. I'm also submitting proposals giving consumers greater protection in their dealings with banks on home mortgages, with installment sellers, and in buying prescription drugs. The health of the state's economy demands our constant vigilance. Our Commerce Department is actively selling job-producing industries on the advantages of New York State. Over the past 15 years, more than 9,400 major plants have expanded or located in New York State compared to 2,500 that contracted or closed, a ratio of 4 to 1 in favor of economic growth in New York State. All this is not to say that we don't face serious problems. While total employment has gone up substantially over the past 10 years, especially jobs in the service sector, manufacturing employment is down, due largely to the loss of such jobs in New York City, particularly in the garment trades. We must increase our efforts to improve the attractiveness of New York to job-producing industries, and to this end, I will propose doubling to 2% the tax credit for investment in new or expanded industrial facilities. I will also propose legislation giving inner-city small businessmen a better break in getting the insurance protection they need to survive and to succeed. Recent layoffs due to the energy crisis dramatize the fact that increases in unemployment insurance and other worker benefits, which have not been raised since 1970, are long overdue. I am recommending increases in unemployment insurance and other worker benefits and an increase in the minimum wage for farm workers. I will also ask you to approve the state's plan of improved occupational safety and health. Since last summer, an informal task force composed of representatives of both houses of the legislature, the regents, and the governor, have been meeting in an endeavor to reach a common position on clearly needed adjustments in state aid for elementary and secondary education. The goal of this group is to develop recommendations which can be submitted to the regents, the legislature, and the governor during the 1974 legislative session. As soon as possible after receiving such recommendations, or if the task force reports it cannot reach agreement, I will make my recommendations for action at this session on this vital issue of school aid. And in other messages, I will submit the administration program covering other elementary, secondary, and higher education matters. Last year, as you know, Governor Rockefeller established the Office of Education Performance Review, headed by Daniel Klepak, to recommend ways of getting more value out of the billions of dollars our taxpayers spend on elementary and secondary schools every year. Mr. Klepak will continue his work with my strong backing. I am also giving full support to the state's Welfare Inspector General. George Berlinger has done a remarkable job of exposing and rooting out welfare cheats and chiselers. My friends, the welfare cheat not only plunders the public till and picks the pocket of the working taxpayer who is struggling to make ends meet, but these chiselers also distort the public's view of the deserving people on welfare. Despite inflation, deserving people in this state who need welfare assistance to survive have been receiving payments based on the same standard of need since 1970. I am recommending an increase to bring these payments up to a more realistic level. After receiving the anticipated recommendations of your Joint Committee on Court Reorganization, I will submit the administration programs for improving the operation and the organization of our courts. But in the meantime, there are some immediate steps we can take to improve the administration of justice. I am submitting legislation to speed up the selection of juries, reduce pretrial delays, facilitate the prosecution of racketeers, and extend the life of the Temporary State Commission of Investigation. One major incentive to organized crime is the high New York City cigarette taxes piled on top of the state tax, which have made that city the promised land for cigarette bootleggers. Cigarette bootlegging costs our taxpayers $85 million annually in lost tax revenues from legitimate sales. It puts small, honest storekeepers out of business and costs people their jobs. It provides the front money for loan sharking and drug traffic and other enterprises of organized crime. I propose a one-year experimental repeal of New York City's taxes on cigarettes, and the state will make appropriate adjustments to make up the city's net direct loss from the repeal of these taxes. I would add that this action will not promote cigarette smoking. It will merely take cigarette sales from the black market, where they destroy honest men's jobs and produce crooked profits, and shift these sales to the open market, where they will preserve jobs and produce honest profits and provide needed public revenues. We also have to have tougher handgun regulation. I will submit legislation to tighten the criminal penalties for illegal possession of handguns and to regulate the issuance of pistol permits to minors. Last year, as you are very well aware, New York adopted a tough program to drive hard drug pushers for profit out of business and to encourage the pusher for habit to get into treatment. In November, drug arrests were down 45% from a year ago. During the months ahead, we will intensify our efforts to get addicts into treatment. And if the need appears, I will propose additional steps to make our anti-drug laws even more effective. Ladies and gentlemen, the quest for a cleaner environment and the harsh reality of the energy crisis demonstrate the necessity of balancing competing social objectives. Unquestionably, the energy crisis will force some temporary readjustments, but the basic thrust of our commitment to clean water and clear air and the preservation of open spaces must and will continue. As another initiative, I am recommending legislation requiring gravel, sand, and stone excavators whose operations scar the landscape to restore those lands to an attractive and useful condition. No sensitive no concerned citizen of New York could be anything but appalled, ladies and gentlemen, by the wretched housing in which so many thousands of our people live. The home is where our hopes are molded, and a decaying slum builds only frustration, despair, and resentment. I am determined to do all in my power to improve housing for the poor. Now, while conditions are bad, they would be immeasurably worse were it not for the extraordinary housing job being done by the state's Urban Development Corporation, supplementing the programs of the Division of Housing and Community Renewal. But very frankly, state and local agencies lack the huge financial resources to do the job on the scale demanded. The key to housing lies in Washington. Last Sunday, as perhaps you noted, I announced the appointment of Robert Moses as special advisor to the governor on housing. I am delighted that he has agreed to work with me to help all of us pull together our efforts to make sure that the federal money in housing action which must come is what will serve New York best, and that New York will obtain as much federal housing money as it needs. Skyrocketing rents in New York City and certain suburban areas of the state are another shocking dimension of the housing problem. While landlords are entitled to a fair return on their investment, tenants must be protected from unconscionable increases in rents. I will review the recommendations of your Housing Committee, your Select Committee, and the Stein Commission in developing a program to protect tenants against unwarranted rent increases. In another area of concern, I look forward to the report of the task force Governor Rockefeller appointed to make recommendations for eliminating any employment discrimination against women in state government. I'm also directing all appropriate agencies of the state to intensify present efforts to identify and combat discrimination against women in all areas under their jurisdiction, public and private alike. I am further recommending legislation to remove any remaining barriers which prevent women from obtaining credit on the same basis as men. My friends, in these days of raging inflation, no economic hardship falls on all our people more cruelly than high medical costs. Yet many health insurance plans contain elements best described as incentives to waste and higher costs. Many patients are in hospital beds at $125 a day and more, rather than being treated in a clinic or in a doctor's office, simply because their insurance covers only hospital care. I am directing a thorough review of the ways in which health insurance can be improved to create incentives for treating patients in the most economical manner consistent with medical needs. And I will also submit legislation to improve health insurance coverage for mental illness and legislation to encourage further the formation of prepaid comprehensive health care plans. Our hardworking, self-reliant farm families are a blessing to our state. A highly successful self-help program is the County Cooperative Extension Service. I propose an increase in the present state aid program for county cooperative extension associations and allowing each to choose the most effective extension programs for its particular area. I'm also submitting legislation to do more for our older citizens, including increased job protection for older workers, expanded property tax relief for older homeowners, better insurance protection for older people, and free admission to state parks for older persons a day a week to enhance their recreational opportunities. With respect to our young people, I look forward to the report and recommendations of the Law Revision Commission, which is presently reviewing the rights and responsibilities of persons between 18 and 21. I will also establish an interdepartmental commission on services to children and youth to coordinate and improve services not only to the child who comes to the attention of the court, but also to all handicapped or neglected or abused children. The state lottery could be more productive if we add a daily lottery to compete with illegal numbers betting, now largely in the hands of organized crime. I am recommending such a daily lottery to shift this form of wagering from criminal management to state management, where the proceeds can benefit the public rather than racketeers. And let us now consider the essentiality of preserving the treasure of New York's historic heritage. Although our state is a living text in the history of America, sadly, many of our historic sites receive little more than basic custodial and maintenance service. I am recommending a state program to restore and preserve these landmarks of our historic past so that they can provide more inspiration for more of our fellow citizens from within and without the state. I am also recommending a new state park on Roosevelt Island in the East River in New York City to include a privately financed memorial honoring Franklin D. Roosevelt, whose name looms so large in the history of our state and our nation. And my final recommendation, ladies and gentlemen, is in the critical area of governmental efficiency and economy. The last major examination and reorganization of this state's government took place under Governor Al Smith over 45 years ago. During the ensuing 4 decades, as the state's population grew and people looked more and more to government for new and expanded services, and local government, including school districts, required more and more of the state's resources, with virtually constant inflation raising the cost of government as relentlessly as it raised the cost of living for the citizen, annual state budgets and the taxes to support them have risen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as this process has continued, successive governors and legislatures have striven to deliver state services to the people economically and efficiently. But in my view, the time has come for the first complete and objective review of the total operation of state government in almost half a century, measured by the standards of economy and efficiency. I will, therefore, appoint a committee of the type popularly known as a Little Hoover Commission to make recommendations for greater efficiency and economy in all branches of the state government. And I want this non-political committee to be largely privately financed and staffed by experts on loan from all elements of the private sector. This, then, concludes my substantive recommendations to date, fuller details of which you will find in the printed message. But, ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues of many years, as we meet, our state and our nation are entering a time of adversity. The book of Proverbs says, "If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small." The American people are not going to faint. The wonder of America is really not its great cities and its swelling suburbs, but that once, and not so long ago, all this was an untamed wilderness. The wonder of America is not really our endless ribbons of railways and roadways, but that a few centuries ago, America had no road at all. The wonder of America is not our great universities and our famous capitals of research, but that a moment ago, as history is measured, America lacked even a schoolhouse. I have no fear for the American people in a time of adversity. We will learn anew that adversity brings out the true character of a people. There is within our national character a gene of toughness, of resourcefulness, of courage. Now, it may have been blunted by years of prosperity, and it may have been softened by easy living, and it may have been dulled by an obsession with comforts and convenience. But the inner core of the American character remains strong. Let us never forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are a people who conquered an untamed continent, survived civil war, rode out the Great Depression, saved the world from tyranny in 2 world wars. We aren't going to be defeated by a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit or a thermostat set at 68 degrees. The energy crisis and the other challenges we face will only force us to reach inside ourselves to find the strength that has been there all along. These challenges are pulling us closer together, making us see the need, the value, indeed the beauty of helping one another. They are reminding us, basically, of the sweet satisfaction that comes from knowing we can still do for ourselves. And it's a challenge to us, to all of us, in all branches of state government, to lead the people in so critical an age. With God's help, let us go forward together and meet that challenge with courage. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the members of the Senate and its presiding officer, we desire to express our deep appreciation to Speaker Duryea and to all the members of the Assembly for their hospitality, which has been accorded to us in this beautiful chamber. As I am about to declare this joint session ended, I'd like to ask those members of the Senate to please return immediately to the Senate chamber so that we may continue with the business of that House. I now announce this joint session adjourned. I keep this for my very own.
House will stand in recess for a brief period while